Hey everyone, it's Mikki here. You're listening to Wikipedia, and this week on the podcast I speak to Dr. Anthony Chaffee. He is an American medical doctor and neurosurgical registrar and the host of the Plant Free MD podcast, which shares case studies, research, and opinion all about, you guessed it, a carnivore approach. So Anthony and I spend a large part of time discussing the problem with nutrition science and historically what we've been told are health principles that we should live by with regards to diet and why these are flawed. And I think that anyone interested in nutrition who is unaware of the history of nutrition science will find this really illuminating. And I certainly really enjoyed discussing this aspect of nutrition with Anthony. And we also discuss the carnivore approach and how Anthony found himself eating an animal-forward diet and the profound positive health impact it had for him and positive performance impact it had. And subsequently how this then resulted in his private practice helping others eat a species-specific diet, which is what we also talk about in this podcast. So Dr. Anthony Chaffee can be found over on Instagram, and I've got a link to his Instagram account, and also on YouTube where he has over 440,000 followers. And this is where he shares a lot of his information. So if you have any interest in this area at all, I absolutely recommend that you check it out. So Dr. Anthony Chaffee is an American medical doctor and neurosurgical registrar who, over the span of 20 plus years, has researched the optimal nutrition for human performance and health. It is his assertion that most of the so-called chronic diseases we treat are caused by the food we eat or don't eat and can be improved, and in some cases reversed, with dietary changes to a species-specific diet. He began university at the age of 16, studying molecular and cellular biology with a minor in chemistry, which culminated in an MD from the Royal College of Surgeons. He was an All-American rugby player, former professional player in England and America, and has also trained in MMA fighting at AMC Kickboxing in Kirkland, Washington. Dr. Anthony Chaffee is now based in Perth, Western Australia. I think you're really going to enjoy this interview, guys. So before we crack on into it, I would just like to remind you that the best way to support this podcast is to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening platform, because that increases the visibility of Wikipedia in amongst the literally thousands of other podcasts that are out there. So more people get the opportunity to learn from the experts that I have on the show, such as Dr. Anthony Chaffee. All right, team, enjoy this conversation. Anthony, thank you so much for taking time to speak to me this morning about your carnivore approach. And I was just thinking about it actually yesterday. I was on your YouTube channel watching just some of your interviews with people who have adopted an animal-forward sort of diet / carnivore diet. I don't know what people like. You know, people have they like to call it different things. And thinking, gosh, this just so would not be newsworthy if I was, talking to someone who is completely plant-based.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing is that, everyone has different ways of eating. And I think a lot of us or all of us are trying to find the best way that works for us and works for our health. And there are different theories on that. And so this is just the one that I've come to, and I believe it's evidence-based. I believe it's what the best evidence shows that we should be eating. And my personal experience is that I've never felt healthier in my entire life. And my professional experience has been that changing people from all the very healthy alternatives to this way of eating confers the most health benefits that I've ever seen. And in fact, better health benefits than many groups of medications, because people are coming off medications. They're coming off their diabetes medications, their blood pressure medications, their heart failure medications. I've had a number of people go from an ejection fraction of less than 15 and in a few months on animal-based carnivore diet, they have gone to normal ejection fractions. And so they're circling the drain for death or a heart transplant, and now they're completely normal. So, this is something that defies our current wisdom and understanding, but it works, and it's something that more and more people are finding because it works. And so I think it's just very important to let people know about that so they can try it for themselves.
Yeah, I also think, because I really want to chat about how you initially came onto like a carnivore type approach. But what it does strike me is that the number of people that I listen to in this space and who've had a similar experience to you professionally and personally is that it's not backed by any sort of agenda. Like there's no big farmer out the back or PH farmer out the back, or it's not like sponsored by General Mills or anything like that. When you can't really say that for a lot of the plant-based agenda that is out there, and even the likes of professional bodies like the American Dietetics Association and other big bodies that are supposed to be there informing our health. Like there's just this undertone of industry.
There absolutely is, and a lot of these different studies that support plant-based ways of eating are, first of all, they're epidemiological survey studies. So they're telling people, say, hey, what did you eat in the last 2 years? Like anyone would ever remember, except me, because I've only eaten meat for the last 2 years. But other people, but I couldn't tell you exactly how much I've had every single day for the last 2 years. But they so it's pretty soft science anyway. It's pretty weak. It's very easy to manipulate, which they do, and it's also generally funded by Kellogg's and Nestle and Coca-Cola and Pepsi, or the different lobbies that work for them, like the American Beverage Association. They pay influencers and lobby to push sugar friendly and sweetener friendly sort of legislation and advertising, and as well as the Beyond Meats and the Impossible Burger. Those sorts of people. These are companies that are owned by these big tech billionaires that are trying to push this agenda and also push their product. And they're paying for a lot of research at Harvard and at Stanford with Dr. Willett and Dr. Gardner. And the Dr. Gardner had a study that came out trying to say that, look at twins, and one of them went vegan and they're so much better. And it was flawed on many, many levels. And I would say intentionally flawed due to his ideologies. But it was also funded by the fake meat industry, and they made a Netflix special about that, and that was also funded by the fake meat industry as well. So yeah, there are definitely strings attached. There's definitely an agenda there. It's an agenda that pushes a product. The agenda of the carnivore-based movement and the ketogenic meat-based movement is not being driven by an industry. It's not being driven by a product. It's being driven by results, and it's being driven by doctors and researchers and patients who have seen this work and are really excited about getting this out to people because it actually works. It's not something that sells something. I've been very loath to take even any sponsors for my podcast or any affiliates because I didn't want to taint that. I do have them, but they're only very specific ones that are that go very much along those lines. Like working with ranchers that have regenerative pasture raised, grass fed, and finished beef, and it's just like, okay, that's not a bad sort of thing, and that's an individual family producer. It's not like a big corporate whatever. And it's and the reason they wanted to sponsor my podcast is because of what I talk about how meat is healthy. I don't say that because they pay me. It's that's the other way around. So yeah, there are definitely agendas, and even more agendas than that. But a lot of these, like the American Dietetics Association, was founded by a lady named Lena Cooper, for instance, who had religious ideology that made her vegetarian, vegan, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they don't believe in eating meat. They think that it's sinful. It causes lust. That was 100 years ago, but they're still around and they're still pushing policy. They're still major funders of plant-based vegan sort of studies, like from Walter Willett and Dr. Gardner. They push out a lot of research. They also are part of the peer review process. So they're the peer reviewers. And when these studies get put in, they have a bias and a publication bias that is also going through. And they teach this at their medical school. They have different professors and things like that are going and proselytizing this elsewhere. They have they had the McGovern report that vilified cholesterol originally in 1977 that was written by a Seventh-day Adventist, Dr. Pritikin, who first pushed a really low-fat, no-fat sort of approach, the really no-meat approach. He's called the father of plant-based diets. He was a professor at Loma Linda Medical School, which is the Seventh-day Adventist medical school. So lifestyle medicine, that's something that was is a specialty in medicine. It's not really a specialty. It's a certificate course that you can get. It's like 20 to 40 hours of online work where you can get this certificate in lifestyle medicine. And it's all about, diet and lifestyle and how that's the first step. And then you use medicines after that. Totally agree with that approach. But the diet that they're espousing is a vegetarian diet. And that's the origins. They founded that, and they call it the Garden of Eden diet. When we need to be eating what Adam and Eve were eating, the Garden of Eden. We're just eating plants. Well, I'm sorry, we aren't in the Garden of Eden, and that doesn't work. And there's no B12 in the Garden of Eden. So. It's and it's funny. They even say that too. They say, well, because we were cast out of the Garden of Eden, we don't get B12 from plants anymore. But still, just do it. It's like, what are you talking about? So it's very strange. But yeah, there are a lot of hidden agendas and motives behind the plant-based movement.
And I feel like it's a little bit confronting for people to hear that and actually want to take that on board, particularly the likes of someone like me who, I studied a science degree in a university around nutrition. Like if anyone was going to know about nutrition, surely it would be the lecturers who taught me that I then went to teach others about, But even just the knowledge, you can't even really trust the science that is in the journals that are informing the messages that are out there. It's actually I wouldn't have thought that would have been the case 20 years ago, when I first started sort of teaching and stuff. And it's just mind-blowing to me just how corrupt the whole system, that whole system even is. Like the likes of last week with the low carbohydrate diets are associated with type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, right.
That study coming. I mean, it's laughable if you understand physiology and how to interpret research. But if you are just a lay individual reading a news headline, to them it's yet another study to prove that the alternative doesn't work. And I feel like it then shuts off this opportunity to so many people to actually make really good decisions around their health, because they're just anything that goes against the narrative is there's an agenda that to keep the real story out of the news.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. The processed food industry, processed food and beverage industry, they spend 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research, just nutritional research, than the National Institutes of Health, right? The NIH. And so, it's you follow the money. I mean, it's always been the same story. They're paying for this. It's just, I mean, you can think of it as part of their marketing budget. This is marketing. They're just trying to push this thing. Oh, aspartame isn't all that bad. Actually, you have to drink all these different cans, and it doesn't really do. Oh, it's fine. And sugar doesn't make you gain weight. I mean, I swear to God, there was one study from, they call it a study from Coca-Cola that argued that drinking Coca-Cola and eating sugar actually made you lose weight. And again, I was like, shut up. Just go away. And, so it's, it's funny how they can manipulate these things. But, the tobacco companies did the same thing. Yeah. They did this for decades. They lied about how dangerous their product was. They finally got caught lying about how dangerous their product was, and they got fined $400 billion or something like that in the 1980s. But that's just par for the course. They paid different scientists and researchers to pump out data to say, oh, well, look, cigarettes aren't that bad, and they don't cause cancer, and they're not addictive, and they don't cause emphysema. And so I remember seeing some of these hearings as a kid, and they were saying, there was well, different senators saying, well, what about these studies and these studies all saying X? And they would say, well, but we have these studies and say, the opposite. So we just don't know. I mean, we just need more data. We just need more studies. And so the default, if we just need more studies, is that we get to keep doing what we're doing. We keep getting to sell people poison, and you don't get to stop us because there's 30 studies that say it's bad and there's 30 studies that say it's fine. And so, we just don't know. So they intentionally muddy the water in the literature, and they have been doing that for decades and decades. And then we got the tobacco memos that someone leaked those out. And showed that they knew damn well what they were doing, and they knew exactly how harmful tobacco was, and they were perjuring themselves and lying, in front of Congress, which is actually a criminal offense. I mean, they got a civil fine, but they should have been put in jail. I mean, they're putting out a product that they know is harmful and deadly, and so people died as a result of that. And that's I mean, in my book, that's at least manslaughter, but maybe even worse, because in America, third degree murder is if you killed someone but you didn't mean to do it. Second degree murder is you meant to kill them but you didn't premeditate it. First degree is premeditated. Well, they may not have meant to kill people, but they sure as hell knew what they were doing was going to kill people. And because their own research said that. The interesting thing is that other institutions were doing that as well. The sugar companies were doing that in the 50s and 60s. They were paying off different researchers like Ansel Keys and a number of people from Harvard to lie and screw up data to make it look like cholesterol was a problem in regards to heart disease, as opposed to sugar, which was the other going argument at the time. I think it's a combination of things, but I think sugar and seed oils and other processed foods definitely play a role, a big role, and especially that combination of sugar and seed oils. But either way, that was the other going argument, and so they wanted to protect their product, and so they lied and paid these people to lie as well. Ansel Keys famously did the 7 Nations study, which showed this arcing, upwards curve of countries that had more saturated fat and cholesterol, and they had higher rates of heart disease. And I think most people know this, but he had complete data for actually 22 countries at the time of publication, and he cherry picked the ones that fit the most dramatic curve. But even if he didn't, there are 2 major things wrong with that. One, it's an associative study. You cannot make a cause and effect statement from an associative study. And 2, which not a lot of people understand or even know about, is that the relative increased association, so the R value for cholesterol being associated with cardiovascular disease, was exactly the same R value as sugar and cardiovascular disease, which seemed to not make the headlines, right? So he goes around saying that sugar is safe and and cholesterol is the worst thing ever. They have the exact same R value in his 7 Nations study. So ignoring the rest of the 15 other countries that he omitted, he was also involved in. But again, it's an associative study either way. And you cannot make a cause and effect statement. You have to have an experimental data set, like a randomized controlled trial, to really show that, a large, high-powered randomized controlled trial. And there have never been any randomized controlled trials or experimental data ever showing a cause and effect relationship between cholesterol or saturated fat and cardiovascular disease. Not a single one. But there have been at least 5 randomized controlled trials, large numbers with thousands of patients, showing the opposite, showing that there's absolutely no relationship between reducing saturated fat and cholesterol and heart disease. Or in the 2 larger studies, one of which Ansel Keys was involved with, called the Minnesota Coronary Experiment, that had nearly 10,000 participants that were institutionalized, and so they could perfectly control every meal that comes in, which is very difficult to do with these long-term dietary studies. That they found that by replacing saturated fat with unsaturated vegetable oils and margarines, that did indeed lower cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, but then more people died of heart attacks and strokes as a result. And so Ansel Keys was actually one of the lead researchers in that Minnesota coronary experiment that went from 1968 to 1973. And yet it never got published until 2014 because they buried it and they didn't want anybody knowing about it because they were being paid off. They were being paid to get a result for the sugar company, and they found the opposite. And so, knowing full well that with experimental data, with a large randomized controlled trial that completely upended the cholesterol heart hypothesis, 4 years later, the McGovern report is written. Ansel Keys is still pushing for that model. And then we get the USDA declaration that cholesterol causes heart disease, and that's the end of the story. And yet they knew they were involved in randomized control experimental data that showed an inverse relationship, actually showed that reducing saturated fat cholesterol caused harm, and yet they kept pushing this. So, I mean, to me, that's tantamount to murder as well. I mean, these should be criminal trials. So all this is published. That Minnesota coronary experiment that was uncovered by Dr. Ramsden over at the NIH, and he published that in 2014. He actually got the data from one of the other researchers' children, and who were doctors at the time, and they found their dad's old stuff, and they were able to uncover this data. It was all on like punch cards and things like that. So it was old stuff, and so they pushed that out. So I mean, it just shows the lack of integrity in the scientific disciplines. You cannot just blindly trust things just because they're published in a peer review system. The peer review system, by definition, is old boys club. They're going to let in the things that they want anyway. Quite often, if it's something that is new and pushes boundaries, the peer reviewers will go, no, 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 that's not what I learned in school, and they won't let it go through, even if it's fully supported by by the data that they present. I've seen this in physics, which is just supposed to be a hard science. My brother-in-law is actually PhD from MIT in computer science and theoretical quantum computing, right? So it's a wild thing. We don't have quantum computers, but they theorize, show mathematically what we can do with a quantum computer if and when we get them. And so that's his PhD. It's a pretty esoteric, sort of highbrow sort of thing. But so it's a very new field, right? Because we don't even have quantum computers. And he sort of theorized, he actually showed and wrote this huge paper about, hey, this is how we can change things, this is how we can look at things, and how we can do things without these big, horrible, complex equations. You have to do it much more simply. And he actually showed that they can do this much more simply. And the peer reviewers just said, they didn't even read his paper. They just said, for this sort of subject, you would actually normally see this big, long equation, and you don't have that anywhere in your paper, so we're not going to look at it. It's like, no, the whole paper is arguing that you don't need that big, long equation, right? And you didn't even read it. You just looked for, is there a big, long equation here? No, we're not going to listen to it. And so that's the gatekeepers of the peer reviewers. If it looks different than what they recognize, it's just very blinders on. They don't take it in. And you can also have the peer review system like we see at Loma Linda and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, where they let through things that go along with their ideology. So unfortunately, you cannot just trust something because it's been published. You have to look at who published it, who paid for it, and actually read the study. You don't just read the conclusions because it can, or the headline. They say, "Oh, this is what it is," and then you actually read the study and you're like, "That is not supported by what's in there." So it's a bit of a minefield, but you have to navigate it.
And I mean, Anthony, it's not like you learnt all of this in your undergrad, because you went through medical school. And as I understand, you're either a registrar for brain surgery, or you're on that path, but you've actually taken a little bit of a sideways step into this field of health and nutrition. So what started you on that?
Well, on the health and nutrition side of things, I've always wanted to be, a doctor, and specifically a surgeon. So that's what I've been pursuing is neurosurgery, brain and spine surgery, and that's what fascinates me. I absolutely love it, and I've been working in that here in Perth since 2020 as a neurosurgical registrar, as you mentioned, and I've had a particular interest in diet and nutrition, how that affects um, health and specifically athletic performance, because I was a professional athlete in my earlier life, and that was something that was very important to me. And when I was trying to aspire to become, a top level athlete, that's what I thought about was nutrition, because obviously you're fueling your body. You put the wrong fuel in a car, it's not going to run properly, right? And so the same thing goes for our bodies. And so I was learning that the traditional sort of arguments, and taking nutrition classes in college, and you just sort of say, well, you need this many carbs and this much protein, this much fat, and all that sort of stuff that we get taught. And the sort of the formative moment for me was when I was taking class in cancer biology at the University of Washington in Seattle, and our professor started talking about how plants actually had a lot of carcinogens in them. I already sort of understood the concept because I'd taken botany and biology, and I understood that plants' major defense is chemical. They can't run away or fight back like animals can, so they use chemical warfare to stop from being eaten. And so, but no one had ever really made that argument as far as like the food that we eat. And of course, that makes sense. No, there's not going to be just some plants that are poisonous and some aren't. It's just that they're all going to make poisons. It's just that certain animals are going to have more defenses against certain poisons than others. And so while we do have more defenses, we actually use a lot of technology to detoxify a lot of these things, cooking, fermenting, process called nixtamalization, which is how we used to process corn. There's all sorts of different ways to lower the toxic load of plants, or actually people are still getting hurt. 5 kidney beans undercooked have put people in the hospital, as per the WHO, who is no fan of the carnivore diet. So that's not me saying that. That's a fact. And so we were going through this in cancer biology, and he was just talking about carcinogens, and he was talking about how 24 years ago that Brussels sprouts had 136 carcinogens identified just in Brussels sprouts, and over 100 just in mushrooms, and over 60 and 80 in spinach and kale and lettuce and cabbage and cucumber and broccoli and all these different fruits and vegetables that we had eaten, and literally even pages of all the different produce items that we would typically eat, and the number of carcinogens that had been identified in them, which was pretty wild. And I remember thinking, just being blown away. We thought that he must be joking. We realized he wasn't. And I remember thinking in my head, well, but vegetables are still good for you, though, right? Even though I hated them and I didn't want to eat them, which should have told me something. Just my natural instincts were telling me. And he just sort of gave us a funny look, and he just said, "I don't eat salad.
Huh.
I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables.
Oh, wow. Yep.
Plants are trying to kill you." I was like, right? Forget plants. And I just stopped, and I never felt better in my life. I defaulted into just eating meat and eggs because I'm just walking around wide-eyed and confused in the grocery store after that class. Like, well, what the hell do I eat? And
Because
like
prior
anything's
to
plant.
this, you were interested in nutrition. It wasn't like you were eating the cereals and things like
Oh
that
God,
anyway. No,
yeah, no,
yeah.
always whole foods. I mean, we would have breakfast cereal around, but every other meal was home cooked.
Yeah.
We never ate out. It was like on birthdays, maybe we'd go to like some restaurant or something like that. But my mom really liked cooking, and she is a fantastic cook, and so we learned from her, and we just cooked. I mean, I was sort of that first generation where processed food and packaged food really started coming into prominence, and it was sort of my generation just sort of didn't get taught how to cook from their mothers, and so most people my age would have grown up not knowing how to cook, and then they didn't know how to cook, so they couldn't cook for their kids, and it's just like ordering ready-made meals or Uber Eats or just buying prepackaged stuff as well. And now you're sort of 2-3 generations away from anybody who's ever seen a stove before and then knows what the hell to do. And but we didn't do that. We were always whole food, whole food omnivorous diet, but always very heavy in meat, but like generally lean meat, because my dad read Dr. Pritikin's book, and he was very up on like, oof, we gotta stay away from fat for heart health, and he was very very adamant about that. because he didn't want to die of a heart attack. He wanted to be there with his kids and enjoy his life and his family. And so that's how we grew up. But it was always whole food. It was always home cooked. It was very, very clean. I never ate junk food. And so, just that change. And people say that, well, the only change is, you go to a whole food carnivore diet where you're getting rid of the junk food, and that's the only benefit. No, sorry. I was only eating a whole food omnivorous diet and just dropping the carbs and vegetables made a massive difference in my health. And years later, I did that for about 5 years, but then I started slipping off because I didn't realize how significant what I was doing was.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was 38, so 13 years later, I came back around to it.
Why was that?
Well, I saw Dr. Baker on Joe Rogan talking about that. My brother was blown away. He was like, he was saying that he was just like, wow, I saw this doctor on Joe Rogan, and he's a doctor and he played professional rugby as well. And he's saying that you can just get all the nutrients you need from eating meat. And, instantly
You
all
remembered.
my training and teaching, it was just like, what? Well, yeah, but my initial instinct was like, oh, that's crazy. But I was like, but hold on a second. I basically did that for 5 years,
mm-hmm.
and I didn't eat anything else. And I remember thinking to myself every few months, I was like, do I need a banana or a multivitamin or something like that? I'm not going to get in trouble. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, well, I feel good. My gums aren't bleeding. So let's just ride this out, see where it goes. And, I never felt better. And, when I was 25, I sort of slipped off of it when I was living in England, playing rugby over there. And at 25 years old, I felt like a superhero. At 25 and a half, when I just started slipping off of it, I didn't. And I remember thinking, like, why don't I feel as good as I normally? Why don't I feel as superhuman amazing as I normally do? And I chalked it up to age, but it's like, but you don't just decline like that in a matter of months.
Were you in the UK? Was it the curry? Do you think? Probably
No,
the curry's
I didn't
the
have
pubs.
curry. It wasn't even that bad.
Yeah.
It was just it was more convenient to get chicken that had a bit of crumbs on it. That was it.
Yeah.
That was all it was. That was the only thing. And so I had that a few times a week. Other I was eating just eggs and meat. And then it's just some crumbed chicken, and that was it. And I started not feeling as good, and I didn't know what it was. But of course, when you allow one thing back in, because before that for 5 years, I was just, that as a plant, not eating it. It was just a litmus test. Plant, no, not doing it. Plant or mushroom, not doing it. And then all of a sudden it was just like, ooh, well, some crumbs on it. Well, maybe it's not that big of a deal. Dose makes the poison. So, dose does make the poison. Dose is that big. It's tiny, right? And so it's just a little bit of crumbs 3 days a week was enough to take the shine off my health and my performance as an athlete as well. And then, once you start, convincing yourself that that's okay, you convince yourself that something else is okay. And then all of a sudden you just sort of go back into, the eating habits of a lifetime. And pretty soon I was just going back to eating a very healthy, so-called healthy, omnivorous whole food diet. I never ate junk food. I maybe had, even when I was eating that sort of stuff, I may have had pizza once every 2 years. So it's not something that I would have on a regular basis, never.
And also you normalize how you feel, right? So you initially thought, well, I feel a little bit poorly, but I'm older now. And then you just sort of normalize it. So this is just what being 30 or 30, which actually is it's very young, but still, it's not quite as young as 20. So how are you, like, can you recall when you just decided to, like, that you heard your brother talk to you about Joe Rogan and Sean Baker, and you're like, right, I'm back on it. Like, was there any kind of initial side effects for you, Anthony, or did you immediately feel better? Like, what was that? Because a lot of people who are curious understand that there's got to be some sort of like transition period, and what are they in for? But what was it? I will ask you about that, but what was it like for you?
For me, it was all aces. There's never a bad time to stop eating poison. Is the way I think about it. And so,
it's a good call.
You get this stuff out of your system, you're going to feel better. Now, there can be a withdrawal. If you're, the sugar and the carbs and things like that, you maybe have a withdrawal, coffee, caffeine, those sorts of things. You will withdraw from those things. I wasn't really eating those things. I never really had sugar, and even at that point, I wasn't purposefully doing a ketogenic diet. I just naturally fell into that because I just noticed that when I had anything containing carbohydrates, my back would hurt a lot more. And it would take 3-4 days for it to calm down after having something. Like I took my niece out for for lunch, and we got some Chinese food, and I had some egg rolls and things like that. And then my back hurt for the next 3 days. I'm like, oh, that's weird. And I'm like, okay, maybe. And I sort of saw that association with carbs. And then a couple of days later, my back was feeling a bit better. And my mom had these like little cheesy bread balls from Costco. And I'm like, oh, damn it, those look good. Maybe I'll just have a couple of those.
Yeah.
And my back hurt again for another few days. I'm like, all right, screw it. And so I just cut those out just because it hurt my back. Increased inflammation, cut down ketones, all these other sorts of things. And so all I was doing was eating whole food, spinach, kale, broccoli, a lot of those. And I figured, I was like, trying to get back in shape. I was just back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh, helping with the refugee camp there from people escaping from an actual genocide in Myanmar in 2017. So it was 2017 to 18 that I was there. And I was trying to get back into shape. I was trying to lose weight. And so I could go back and play rugby, even though I was 38. I was still, actively, playing sports and things like that. And, or trying to. And so I was trying to slim down, and I figured, I was like, okay, I can eat all the greens that I want, but I'm going to limit the meat, and I'm going to keep it lean so I can try to lose weight, because that's what you get told.
Yeah.
I wasn't losing weight. My weight was fluctuating up and down with the water weight. Wasn't going anywhere. Wasn't feeling great. Was feeling pretty rotten, actually. And I was just like, well, it's just my age. I just have to like really work on getting in shape before I can go back out and play rugby. And so I was working on that. I was, had a home gym and trying to get in shape, and it wasn't working. And then I watched that Joe Rogan thing, and I was just like, my brother's like, oh yeah, you can get everything. And I was like, wow, that's a bit weird, but I did do that for 5 years. So this doesn't actually sound all that far fetched. Within 5 minutes of watching that interview, it just everything clicked in. I was like, this guy's more right than he knows, because like there was a lot of research on saturated fat and cholesterol that had really blown that out of the water. The NIH study had come out at that point in 2014. So this was 2018 at this point, just early 2018. And, all these different studies had come out, really blowing the cholesterol heart hypothesis out of the water. Fructose was really toxic. Sugar, and that plants were toxic too. So I had all these different sort of pieces that all sort of fit in with what he was saying. I was like, this makes sense. And I sort of looked at this, and I learned this when I was a kid. We generally learn this when we're kids, is that humans have been apex predators for over 2 million years. Apex predators are by definition carnivores. They eat meat. We've been hunting mammoths for millions of years. There's evidence of mammoth drops over 1 million years ago, scaring a herd of mammoths over a cliff so they crash and burn, and we can cut them up with stone tools and then eat for the year until the herds come through the next year on their migration route. That is hard evidence. It's not observational study saying, oh, well, what's giving people a survey. I mean, that's looking at the hard data and evidence of what happened. And we forget that. And then all of a sudden, everything just clicked in. It was just like, right, we're human. Humans are carnivores as a species. It's just the kind of animal we are. And we're not eating that way. And I thought, like, well, that could be why we're getting sick, because all other animals, when they're fed an inappropriate diet for their species, get sick. That's why there's signs of the zoo say, don't feed the animals. They get very sick if they don't eat their proper diet. You give ducks diabetes by giving them bread, and they have signs saying, don't give ducks bread, for that reason.
The most ignored sign ever.
People always
ignore that, totally, yeah.
Yeah, but we ignore it for us too. We're giving bread to ducks, that's giving them diabetes. Where the hell do we get diabetes from?
Yeah.
Same stuff, know? And so, when I switched, all I was doing was, just dropping the vegetables and eating more fatty meat, really. So I was already ketogenic, and without meaning to be. And so when I saw that, I was like, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And I just cut out all the spinach, broccoli, and kale.
Yeah.
It's disgusting anyway, especially kale. It was rotten. They used to give that stuff to livestock, and they had to stop because it was killing them and giving them massive goiters and thyroid dysfunction. There's an entire class and category of plant toxins called goitrogens
Yeah.
that cause goiters and thyroid dysfunction. And they're giving them to sheep, and they were getting weird birth defects and stillbirths. And they had massive thyroids, massive goiters the size of their heads. I've seen pictures of this. So they couldn't do that because they were killing the livestock and damaging them. Then they gave them to dairy cows so that so they could produce more milk. So they need a lot of feed to produce all the milk that they do. And the milk from these dairy cows were giving the people who drank it goiters, right? And so then they just said, yeah, well, let's just give it to people then. It's just like, what is wrong with you? Like, obviously this stuff is toxic. And it is, it's horrible stuff. And so I got rid of it, and I just started eating meat and more fatty meat. And I felt better right away. And especially 2 weeks later, when I got most of this garbage out of my system, I felt like I was 22 again. I felt like I was a superhero. Like I did at 22. I felt better at 38 than I did it at 27 playing professional rugby, but not on a clean meat-based omnivorous diet that was often ketogenic, because I would generally have meat and a salad because I'm supposed to have a stupid salad, but I wouldn't eat a bunch of carbs or anything like that ever. And I just wasn't interested in it. And and I felt better at 38 than I did over a decade earlier when I was able to train for multiple hours a day, every day. It was wildly different. And so, at that point, I just started digging into the research, going, okay, what do we know? What can we prove? And what has been done? And there's this entire body of data and information and studies that have been published that just do not get taught in medical school and residency, because they just, they're just an alternative point of view, and they're not backed. And most importantly, they're not backed by a major industry that is then saying, when we get educated as a doctors, we go to conferences, but we also get drug reps coming into us saying, oh, here's the new research on this drug and on this drug and on this drug. And doctors treat that as like the research wing of their hospital or something like that. No, it's a salesman. They're showing you exactly the studies that they want. They're presenting it in the exact same way that's going to sell their product. And that's fine, but you have to understand what they're doing and what their motivations are. They are not there to just educate you. But I would see doctors going, oh, I love Tuesdays. Oh, I'm going to get educated. Oh, I'm going to learn about studies. And I was like, no, you're not. You're going to get propagandized. You're going to get an advertisement. And so there's all these studies that show the benefits of a high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diet in the thousands. It's the only diet that's ever been studied with this amount of rigor. And there are thousands of these things, but there's no product on the back end of it, like you said. And so there's no multi-million, multi-billion-dollar marketing budget going out there pushing this and getting this into hospitals and getting this into medical schools and getting this into residencies. You have to find this yourself, but it is there, and it's growing. There's more and more every single day, and if you look for them, you will find them. And so I looked and I found, and so that changed the course of my thinking and certainly my practice. And so while I still wanted to do neurosurgery, and I still do want to do neurosurgery, I had to include this. I had to start incorporating this in my practice as well, because it was just too powerful.
Yeah. And Anthony, I know we're running short on time. There's so much that I could ask you. I first say I love how passionate you are about how much you hate vegetables. I mean, I'm quite different. I quite like vegetables, but you have that, it's like shared passion of loving meat and absolutely despising vegetables, which I find quite hilarious. But I understand where you're coming from. So what do you eat in a day? Like, I'm super interested to know what your sort of routine looks like with that. Because the other thing I will say as well is, as an athlete, particularly as a rugby player, to not eat any carbohydrate is really unusual as well, but also speaks to what we know in the research about carbohydrate and athleticism, really, which is again ignored by large bodies of nutrition societies, etc.
Yeah, well, also because they just don't know about it. They haven't looked for it. They've been taught a certain way and a certain approach, and so that's the thing that people assume, is that if it wasn't taught to you during your degree, you have a degree, you are an expert in this. No, you're an expert in what they taught you. But that doesn't mean that that's the entire body of the information. It's just it's a starting point, and people used to understand that was a starting point from which to continue. And so they think that if it wasn't taught to them in school or during their residency, it wasn't fit to print. And that's not true. It's it, there was a famous address to Harvard, graduating class of Harvard Medical School, like in the 30s, by I was told it was Dr. William Osler, who's a very famous medical professor and teacher, and he said, or whoever said, um, half of what you've learned here at Harvard is going to turn out to be wrong, but no one's going to tell you which half because no one knows. And so you have to go out and figure out which half, and you have to figure out, you have to change that, and you have to then teach the next generation what you found. And that's something we forget. We say, oh, I learned it. This is what it is. Nope, I learned that in medical school. That's what it is. And, okay, but what's that based on? And is there alternate theory, and is there evidence with which to test those theories against? And so that's what you need to do. And so there's a ton of data around, but people don't look at it because it wasn't spoon fed to them, but it's there. And if they want to look for it, they can. What I eat in a day is pretty monotonous, just like a lion, just like a cow. Animals in the wild, they eat very specific things. They just keep eating that thing because you need a very specific constellation of nutrients, vitamins, minerals, proteins, and fats. And you generally have, sort of a singular resource that you get that from. It's very rare that animals would have a wide variety of different things that they eat in order to gain their nutrients. So that's exquisitely rare. And yet we're told that's what you have to do. Well, that's because we're eating very low quality, low nutrient dense foods, plants. And a lot of them have anti-nutrients that can block out the absorption of good nutrients. And so if you're doing that, then you need a whole wide variety of stuff. And you have to include meat because you can't get basic nutrition without meat unless you supplement. We've only had supplements very recently, so we certainly weren't doing that in nature. But you can just eat meat. Just like every other animal, we have a singular, single source dietary diet that we can, thrive on. So that's what I do. So my days are just meat, pretty much. It's 99% of what I eat is beef. I tell people just eat the meat that you enjoy, the fatty meat that you enjoy, that makes you feel the best, and that you have access to and can afford. And for me, that's beef.
Nice one.
And I feel the best on that. I don't have too many organs. It's mostly just steaks. Every now and then I'll have a bit of liver. I've actually sort of grown to like the taste of raw liver. I don't like cooked liver.
Oh,
But
interesting. Yeah.
for some reason, raw liver tastes way better than cooked liver. And so that's what I'll eat. I generally eat about once a day, and usually that's in the evening. So I wake up, I'm not hungry. I don't need to eat breakfast. I just get up and I get ready and I go. And I'm able to work all day. I'm in private practice at the moment, seeing patients, and I don't take a lunch break. I just go all the way through and just get it done. I can see more patients. I can get more done, and I feel fine doing it. After work, if there's time, I'll try to go to the gym, and then I'll eat after that. And if I don't have time to go to the gym, which I often don't because I'm sort of working sort of from 8 a.m. till midnight most days, 7 days a week at the moment. So I have to fix that. But then I'll eat at the end of the day, and that'll do it. If I'm working out regularly, then I'll typically need to eat twice.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's always the same thing. Whenever I eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good, and that's how I know my body has had enough. I don't count calories or macros or weigh things. I just eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. Eggs are fine too, but particularly I don't have any issues. But people with autoimmune issues typically do need to. Well, they'll do best if they stick to just beef and lamb and water and avoid other things.
Do you salt?
I don't anymore. I used to, and I just sort of salted to taste. If you are transitioning onto a ketogenic diet, when your insulin's coming down and normalizing, you can lose too much salt and electrolytes, and so you can get hypovolemic. You can stand up and get sort of postural hypotension, get sort of dizzy. If you're getting that, then you should up your salt even beyond salting to taste. Actually, add it in and get more water as well. But that typically goes away once you're fat adapted and your insulin has come down to normal levels. And so most people actually don't need to add excess salt past taste, but some do. So just be mindful of that. At this point, since I've been doing this for nearly a decade now, so it's like been 7 years since I got back on this, it's been I've used just less and less salt. I used to salt pretty heavily at first, and then it was just sort of using less and less and less. And now I don't use any at all. Now it just tastes perfectly salted without any salt. And if I had salt, it tastes too salty. So,
yeah. And final question, what's your favorite cut of steak?
Usually ribeye, like
nice
fatty ribeye.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Dr. Anthony Chaffee, thanks so much for today. You're a wealth of information, and we've really, not that, I mean, we had 45 minutes, we got through what we could, but your YouTube channel is amazing. So obviously we'll point people in the direction to that and all of your other resources in the show notes. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Alrighty, hopefully you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed talking to him. As you could tell, I mean, he just knows his stuff, doesn't he? Super passionate. I've never met anyone who hates vegetables to the same extent he does. And whilst I do not share that particular dislike, I think that Anthony and I are really aligned in how important it is to eat animal protein in your diet and to be critical of information that is in front of you when it comes to nutrition. Next week on the podcast, I have returning guest Brandon De Cruz, who talks to us all about his high energy flux model. And if you're a fan of Brandon, you're really going to love that episode. And if you're not, hey, listen anyway, because he shares so much great information. And to be fair, if you're not a fan of him, it's probably just because you haven't caught his previous 2 episodes on the show. All right, team, until next week, you can catch me over on Twitter, Threads, or Instagram at Mikki Williden, Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, or head to my website, mikkywilliden.com, and book a one-on-one call with me. All right, team, have the best week. See you later.